Big 14 football is back. Week 1 is officially in the books and Big Ten 23 football is underway. A busy Week 1 in college football. Almost every team in the country has kicked off with the last game being played tonight between Duke and Clemson. A few Big Ten teams started their conference play in Week 1, which is a little unusual, while most played non-conference opponents. Here is a quick look back at the final scores on Big Ten Week 1 football. Minnesota defeated Nebraska 13-10. Michigan State defeated Central Michigan 31-7. Number 25 Iowa defeated Utah State 24-14. Number 2 Michigan defeated East Carolina 30-3. Fresno State defeated Purdue 39-35 in a closely contested matchup. Maryland defeated Towson 38-6. Number 3 Ohio State defeated Indiana 23-3. Number 19 Wisconsin defeated Buffalo 38-17. Illinois defeated Toledo in a close matchup 30-28. Number 7 Penn State defeated West Virginia 38-15, and Rutgers defeated Northwestern 24-7. Football is a tough sport to play, and injuries are part of the game. Here is an updated injury report, from around the Big Ten going into Week 2.
You what?
Indiana is reporting 3 offensive players and 1 defensive player on the injury list, all with non-disclosed injuries. Iowa has 5 offensive players on the injury list, including quarterback Jay Labas. 1 defensive player is also listed. Illinois is reporting only 1 defensive player on IL with an undisclosed injury. Maryland has 2 offensive players on IL going into Week 2. Michigan has a total of 8 players on IL this week, a mix of offense and defense, all with undisclosed injuries. Michigan State has a whopping 10 players
You what?
on IL in Week 2, mostly on defense. All but 1 are out with undisclosed injuries. Minnesota is reporting 6 players on IL, mostly defensive, similar to MSU. Nebraska has 4 players on IL this week. 1 wide receiver is out for the season with a knee injury. Northwestern has only 2 players to report on IL going into this weekend. Ohio State has 5 players to report this week on IL, mostly offensive players with undisclosed injuries. Penn State also has 10 players on IL.
You what?
In Week 2, a healthy mix of offensive and defensive players with undisclosed injuries. Purdue is reporting 3 offensive players on IL in Week 2. Rutgers has 5 offensive players on IL this week, all with undisclosed injuries. Wisconsin reports 10 players
You what?
on IL. 2 are listed as out for this season.
You what?
It's amazing. The remaining 8 are listed as day-to-day, interestingly enough. The Big Ten had its fair share of padding this past weekend, and I mean stat padding. Here are a few players that had big days in Week 1 in Big Ten football, and at the end of this one, we will present a Big 14 Player of the Week as well. Penn State quarterback Drew Allar and U of M quarterback J.J. McCarthy both had big games statistically in Week 1. Allar had more passing yards total over McCarthy, 325 to 280. Maryland quarterback Tunga Viola joined Allar and McCarthy with 3 touchdowns on the day. Purdue wide receiver Deion Burks led the Big Ten this past week in total yards, catching the ball for 152 total yards. University of Michigan Roman Wilson led the Big Ten in touchdowns in Week 1 with 3 receiving touchdowns. Bryce Gallagher from Northwestern was the leader in tackles Week 1 in the Big Ten with a total of 18. He was all over the place. Meanwhile, Minnesota's Danny Strigow led the Big Ten in sacks Week 1 with a whopping 2. Big Fourteens Player of the Week in Week 1 goes to Wisconsin running back Chez Mellusi, who led the Big Ten in Week 1 in total rushing yards and rushing touchdowns. Mellusi had a big day running the ball for the Badgers for a total of 157 yards and 2 touchdowns. That is why Wisconsin's Chez Mellusi is the Big 14 Player of the Week. A look ahead for some Week 2 matchups here in the Big Ten. No teams in the Big Ten will play any conference games this weekend, strictly non-conference football. Also in this next segment, a few predictions for the upcoming week. Indiana plays Indiana State in an in-state game rivalry. IU and ISU are 0-1. Indiana will win this one 30-14. Illinois takes on the Kansas Jayhawks. Both teams are 1-0. Illinois should hand the Hawks and win 31-28. Purdue takes on Virginia Tech in Week 2. Purdue is 0-1 and Virginia Tech is 1-0. Virginia Tech will win this one 28-24. Nebraska plays upstart Colorado in a former Big 12 matchup. Nebraska is 0-1 on the season. Colorado is 1-0. Deion Sanders is ready. Colorado wins this one 31-17. Youngstown State plays Ohio State. Both teams are 1-0 on the season. The Buckeyes will eat penguin for dinner and win this one 35-3. Number 25 Iowa takes on in-state rival Iowa State for the Cy Hawk Trophy. A trophy matchup here in the Big Ten. I always like those. Both teams are 1-0. Iowa State wins in a shocker in a close one, 28-25. Number 2, Michigan takes on the Rebels of UNLV. Both teams are 1-0. The Wolverines win easy, 38-7. Richmond plays Michigan State in Week 2. Michigan State is 1-0, while Richmond is 0-1. Sparty Party in East Lansing this weekend. MSU wins 38-10. UTEP takes on the Wildcats of Northwestern. UTEP is 1-1, while Northwestern is 0-1. The Miners will win this one 24-14. Charlotte plays the Maryland Terrapins this weekend. Both teams are 1-0. Terrapins beat the 49ers 30-13. The Temple Owls play Rutgers in a football game this weekend, not basketball. Don't believe me? Tune into your local stations. Both teams are 1-0. Rutgers wins in a close one, 20-17. Eastern Michigan takes on Minnesota in Week 2. Both teams are 1-0. I'm taking the Eastern Michigan Eagles in a win in an upset, 28-27. Number 19, Wisconsin plays Washington State in the final Big Ten game of Week 2. Both teams are 1-0. Wisconsin wins in a close one, 28-23. The Heisman Trophy race has only just begun, but a few Heisman hopefuls had some serious stats to throw up this past week in Week 1. This is a quick look back at some of the Heisman candidates and what they accomplished in Week 1. A couple new names are now on the Heisman watch list, and both are from the same school, which is incredibly rare. Colorado quarterback Shedeur Sanders and two-way star Travis Hunter are on the board, according to BetMGM.com. USC quarterback Caleb Williams is still the top candidate and the favorite. 597 passing yards with a 53.5% completion rate, with 9 touchdowns and no interceptions in 2023 so far. Washington quarterback Mike Penix Jr. is the solid runner-up right now. 450 passing yards total with a 72.5 completion rate. 5 touchdowns, no interceptions on the season. Florida State quarterback Jordan Travis is a surprise early on, beating the number 5 LSU Tigers this past weekend. 342 yards with a 74.2% completion rate. His only negative stat is 4 touchdowns and 1 interception. Michigan quarterback J.J. McCarthy is holding strong in 2023 so far. A solid 280 passing yards with an 86.7% completion rate with 3 touchdowns and no interceptions after Week 1 keeps him in the hunt. Notre Dame quarterback Sam Hartman rounds out Big 14's Heisman hopefuls going into Week 2. 445 passing yards on the season with an 82.5% completion rate with 6 touchdowns and no interceptions makes the first-year Irish quarterback a serious contender if the numbers continue later on in this season. That draws to a conclusion this week's Big 14 Football Podcast. Be sure to listen to this episode in case you missed anything, and be sure to tune in next week for a brand new Big 14 Football Podcast.